Chapter 24. Getting to the truth. Jason was sat at the dining table racking up more lines of cocaine and drinking beer at a quick rate. He'd nearly finished his third bottle within the half hour we'd been back. I was hoping the alcohol and lack of sleep would force him into his bed, but the coke was keeping him awake, and he didn't look like someone who wanted to rest. He was buzzing from finally putting Amin in his place. "Where the fuck is she?" Jason said. He was clearly disturbed that Sarah wasn't there, welcoming him home with open arms, praising him for defeating her bully of an ex-boyfriend and offering herself to him as payment for his services rendered. I sat at the coffee table, counting the money, confused at how much there seemed to be. "She's at work," I answered. "She'll be home soon." He struggled to snort his next line of coke. His nostrils were getting inflamed and blocked up, and I knew this because I'd been there many times before. "How much is meant to be there? 20 grand?" he asked. "Is it all there? Did you want some of this coke?" He was high as a kite. He couldn't stop twitching his legs and talking nonsense. I'd never seen him this high, or maybe it was that I'd never been sober when he had been like this, and it was the first time I realised how ridiculous he looked and acted when in this state. Did I look as stupid as that when on drugs, I thought. Another reason to stop. "No, I'm alright," I said, declining the offer of Charlie, "and there's definitely over 20 grand here." There was over 20,000 euros, way over. Something didn't make sense. I had a sickly feeling in my stomach. Was I being cynical, or had I been duped? We heard a key go into the front door, so Jason straightened out the shirt he was now wearing and sat upright in his chair, ready for inspection, I thought. I relaxed back into my seat, wishing away the next couple of hours and wanting to be on that plane out of there. Sarah walked into the front room, dropped her keys and phone on the table next to Jason, and raised her eyebrows when she saw the Charlie and paraphernalia next to him. "Bit early for that, Jason, no?" she asked, rhetorically. She turned to say hello to me, but saw the money first and stopped in her tracks for a second or two. "You did it," she said, smiling at me and patting Jason on the shoulder. "Anything for you, beautiful," said Jason, slurring his words. He sparked a cigarette and started tipping out more cocaine. Sarah saw that I wasn't over the moon and sat down opposite me on the other sofa. A large stack of cash and an ugly vase separated us. "Was he home?" she asked. "I'm a bit worried what he's going to do when he finds out we've taken the money." It's like butter wouldn't melt in her mouth, I thought, staring at her, not sure how to go about the conversation we both knew we were about to have. "You don't have to worry about Amin," piped up Jason. "I'm here for you now, Sarah, and always will be." I leant forward in my seat, preparing my words carefully, as I knew that coming across as aggressive towards Sarah wouldn't be too clever with a guard dog sat across the room, as high and as dangerous as he was. But I didn't like being taken for a ride, and being manipulated into doing something I didn't want to do, even if I had reason to hate Amin after the kicking I believed he'd organised for me. I looked her in the eyes, then at the money, then back at her. I could see that she was surprised by how much cash sat between us, piled all nice and neatly. "So how much money did you say there was, Sarah?" I asked. "Does it look like it's all there?" Would she come clean? Would she be the good girl who lost her way and admit the truth when confronted with the evidence? Or would she deny any wrongdoing, play dumb and act confused? "Oh, 20,000, give or take," she said. "Looks about right. Did you count it?" I sat back on the couch. For a moment I held my head in my hands and sighed. She was lying to me, to my face. I hated that. "Yeah, I counted it," I said, then looked her in the eye again. "This is your money, isn't it, Sarah?" She claimed that it was, of course, and only began to buckle when I told her that I'd counted 90,000 euros. Jason sat at the table, listening in, interested. I don't think he knew that she had lied. He was too high to really follow proceedings, but he knew that I wasn't happy with her, and clearly that annoyed him. I could hear him shifting in his seat. I was so close to being away from all this bullshit, away from all of this trouble and all of these people, but I had a moment of weakness, and instead of letting it go, letting her have her stolen money and leaving her and Jason to their lives, I had to let her know that she had let me down, that I had done this for her, as a friend, and I felt offended by the dishonesty. "How come you and Amin split up?" I asked, and then continued before she could answer. "Why did you send us round to steal his money?" "It is his money, isn't it? He's going to go fucking mental, Sarah. Did he tell you it was only 20 grand because he didn't trust you, thinking you wouldn't fuck him over for that amount? Or was that just a guess because you didn't know how much of his money he had stashed in his bag?" And then she broke. First her eyes welled up, then the first couple of tears made their escape, down her beautiful face before being wiped away by her soft, well-manicured hands. "He dumped me," she said, struggling to compose herself, on the edge of breaking down completely. "He dumped me when I needed him most." "Why?" I asked. "What do you mean?" I heard Jason crack his knuckles and he sat upright on the edge of his seat. He was ready to go at me. I was upsetting Sarah and he didn't like it one bit. "Leave her alone, Jimbo," he said. But I was also angry over the deceit, and I wanted to know why she did this, to me, and even to Amin. What had changed between them that she would risk his wrath like that? Was it so big that it warranted sending Jason and me to steal from him, risking getting hurt or even prison, maybe both? "Are you going to tell us why you need this money so much that you sent us to rob your boyfriend?" I persisted. "Why didn't he want you anymore?" Tears were streaming down her face at this point, and when Jason got to his feet and stumbled in our direction, I honestly thought I was about to get another beating. But he didn't go for me. He sat down beside Sarah, put his arm around her and tried to comfort her. It was clear that however much he disliked me, even hated me at that moment, he loved Sarah more, even when she didn't reciprocate those feelings. She pushed away the snotty-nosed, drugged-up fool and he fell to the floor. He stayed down, trying hard to get a grip of himself. I realised just how fucked on the coke that Jason was at that moment, and although I knew he was still incredibly dangerous, he could hardly lift himself from the floor, his face muscles twitching and straining from the effort. So he chose to remain on his back, trying to regain an ounce of composure. "So," I said, turning my attention back to my tearful landlady. "I'm pregnant, okay?" And I told him, she said, before falling to pieces for a few seconds, then sitting upright and wiping her face. She stared me in the eye, ready to spill the beans. "But Amin can't have kids, apparently," she continued, "so he knows I've been sleeping with someone else. And he left me." This news was the shot of adrenaline that Jason needed. It didn't sober him up completely, but he was up on his elbows and able to pay attention to what was going on, to the truths that were unfolding around us. "So he found out you cheated on him," I said, not accepting any of the blame for this one. "And then you sent us around to rob him. What, to get back at him for dumping you?" I couldn't believe it. A woman scorned, even when that woman was a long way from innocent herself, could really fuck a man over. She leant across the table, reached her hands out over the money that now seemed to be only part of the problem, and tried to take my hands in hers, but I pulled away to demonstrate that I wanted no more to do with this. "He's going to go mad," I continued, "and I don't blame him. Let's not do this. Let's not argue," she pleaded. "I love Amin. I never wanted this to happen." Then I made a mistake. "So whose kid is it?" I asked. "I know it isn't mine. We only fucked a couple of days ago." I froze, realising what I'd just done. As I felt Jason's eyes drill a hole into the side of my head, I only dared to look at him, when out the corner of my eye, I saw him turn his gaze to Sarah. He did not look happy, and then she looked back at me, clearly worried at what was likely to happen. Silence filled the room, and the air became too thick to breathe, without the sound of inhaling and exhaling echoing off the walls. Chapter 25. The Truth Hurts. Sarah and I could only sit, frozen to the spot, as Jason slowly climbed to his knees, then pushed himself up and stood at the end of the coffee table, looking down on us, distraught from the betrayal that he felt from the pair of us. He reached into his cargo pants and pulled out a large knife, which he held up to the light to examine it, which is when I saw the dry blood on the blade. "Oh, fucking hell," I said, under my breath. I looked to Sarah. Had she seen the blood? What had he done? Did she know how far Jason would go, and what he was capable of? I didn't know what to do, other than to play the proverbial rabbit in the headlights and await my fate. And then he spoke, slowly, battling against the cocaine in his system to take control, to put his message across to us clearly and concisely. "Firstly," he said, "you ain't got to worry about Amin coming round. He's stuck in bed, and he's going nowhere." "What have you done, Jason?" asked Sarah, the realisation that Jason may have taken things too far finally dawning on her. He didn't answer. He didn't need to. "And secondly," he continued, turning to me and pointing the tip of the blade towards my face, "I told you, keep your fucking hands off Sarah." He pounced on top of me, forcing me into the corner of the sofa, his free hand on my throat and jabbing the knife towards my face. I had hold of both of his wrists, desperately wrestling the hand holding the knife away from me, whilst trying to loosen the grip of the hand that squeezed my windpipe. His full weight was on me, and as much as I tried to push him and the weapon away from me, I couldn't budge him. The nasty little man was fully charged and angry, and I just didn't know how to defend myself. I've read about people saying that they've had their lives flash before their eyes in deadly situations, and that they'd thought about loved ones and had regrets over things they had or hadn't done. Bollocks. "Get that fucking knife away from me, Jace," was the only thing I had going through my mind. Nothing else. "Jason, no," screamed Sarah. "You want to fuck with me, you English cunt? shouted Jason. "I'll cut you up like I did that fucking Moroccan." I'd managed to get the blade away from my right eye, which is where it originally headed, but now it was very close to piercing my neck. Not that I could see it. I could just feel the tip of it picking at my skin just above the point at where it was strangling me. The adrenaline was pumping for both of us, the testosterone running so high it must have stank the room out, possibly attracting ovulating women from miles around. His crazy eyes drilled down into mine with so much hate and disgust. Snot fell from his nose onto me. Saliva dribbled from his mouth down into mine and onto my cheek. "Stop it, just stop it," yelled Sarah, who was ignored by Jason. To me, it sounded like I was underwater when she screamed. Such was the pressure on my neck and chest. My ears had popped and all I could clearly hear was my attempts at breathing, the sounds of a man struggling to survive. The knife was no longer bouncing on and off my neck. It remained there, millimetre by millimetre, edging its way in and breaking skin. Jason was winning the fight, and I was about to die. Then smash. I never knew that the sound of a breaking vase was the most beautiful sound in the world. Jason slumped down on top of me, motionless, as pieces of the ugly vase, the gift he had once given to Sarah, fell down from the back of his head and landed beside me. Sarah stood in tears, as broken as the vase itself. She had saved my life. I pushed the unconscious murderer to the floor, and he fell with a bump between the sofa and the coffee table. I took a few deep breaths, composed myself as best I could and stood up, shaking the large shards of broken ceramic from my clothing. I kicked the knife away from his hand and turned to Sarah, in time to see her collapse to her knees, clinging to the sofa for dear life. "I'm sorry. I'm so sorry," she repeated. I looked back at Jason, comprehending the seriousness of his actions, of our actions, and knew I had to act fast. The shit had well and truly hit the fan. The only way out of this mess was to disappear and never look back. And that sounded okay to me. "He killed Amin, Sarah," I said, finding it hard to believe I was saying these words about someone I'd been calling a friend, a mate. "He's fucking stabbed him to death, Sarah." I looked over at the table where Jason had been sitting. The Charlie, a rolled up note, and his bank card were next to Sarah's keys and phone, along with the cable ties from earlier. I had an idea. I approached the table and checked that Sarah wasn't looking as I slipped the phone into my pocket. I picked up the cable ties and went back to Jace, and Sarah watched as I yanked his hands behind his back and tied him up. I then attached a couple of ties around his ankles for good measure. Then I gave him a couple of punches to the side of his face, partly to keep him unconscious for longer, partly out of spite. I turned back to Sarah, who was still on her knees, motionless and silent except from the sniffling. "We've got to call the police, Sarah," I said, softly. She shook her head. I moved beside her, fell to my knees, and face to face with her, placed my hands lightly on her shoulders. "Sarah, he's killed Amin," I said. "We've stolen his money." "I can't," she said, shaking her head once more. "I'm not going to jail for this. I thought I was doing you a favour," I said. "We've got to pin it on Jason. He's the psychopath here. You've got to call the old bill, Sarah." "No," she said, adamant now, coming out of the shock of what she had just seen and heard. "I can't send him to jail." "What? Why the fuck not?" I asked, growing impatient, the adrenaline still pulsing through my body. "You're going to have a kid, Sarah. Do you want someone like him around your baby?" "The baby's Jason's," she snapped, looking deep into my eyes. I knew it wasn't a lie. She fell towards me, buried her head in my neck and started sobbing again. I was stunned. So he had been having his way with her, the little bastard. No wonder he got so jealous. I wondered how long it had been going on, until I realised that I didn't actually give a shit. I took her by the shoulders and gently pushed her away from me. "Listen, someone is going to prison," I said, "and it's not going to be me. So tell me, is it going to be you?" She shook her head once again, but this time it was the response that I wanted. "No," she said, wiping away the tears from her cheeks. "You phone the cops and I'll keep an eye on him," I said. Slowly she stood, got her bearings and went to the table and threw her hands up in despair, before checking the coffee table and saying that she must have left her phone at the bar. "Go and get mine," I said. "It's in my room." As she went to get my phone from the bedroom, I quickly went through Jason's pockets and found his phone and slipped both parts under the sofa. Sarah came back into the front room with my phone in her hand. "It doesn't work," she said, frustrated. "Oh shit," I said, already knowing that to be the case. "I forgot. It got busted last night." I tapped on Jason's pockets, feigning a search for his phone, then shook my head as I gave up looking. "You'll have to go and find the police outside. They're always floating about," I said. "Quick as you can." I was taking control of the situation, and I was so happy to be sober at this point. I can only imagine how much I would have been flapping if I was high or hungover. Yes, I was in a pickle, to say the least, but I was clear-headed and knew what had to be done. I took Sarah in my arms, wiped her fresh tears away and spoke calmly. I told her that I'd protect her, that we'd get through this together, and that doing this to Jason was probably the best thing for him, that maybe he could rebuild a new future once he'd paid for his crimes. We quickly agreed a plan. Sarah reluctantly left the apartment in search of the police, leaving me to guard Jason and clear away the Charlie from the table and hide the money, just leaving our killer and his fingerprints all over the murder weapon for the police to use as evidence. But as soon as I heard the door close behind her, I put a different plan into action. I picked up my broken phone from the table and stuck it into my pocket. Swiftly moving to my room, I dug out my passport and stuck that in a different pocket, then zipped up the packed suitcase and dumped it by the front door. I ran back to the front room and packed up most of the money into the sports bag. I left Sarah about $20,000 on the coffee table. That's what she originally asked for, right? Back in the bedroom for one last check, all clear. Then I was into the bathroom for my toothbrush and razor, the front room again, looking for anything of mine. Nothing remained that would indicate I'd ever been in the apartment, except fingerprints and DNA, but I didn't have time to wipe down everything. This'll have to do, I said to myself. Jason started to regain consciousness, so I stood above and said goodbye. I told him that it was nice knowing him, before bringing my foot down on his head. It was time to go. Chapter 26. It's escape for some. Walking along the seafront with my suitcase in the sports bag, I probably looked like any other tourist, except maybe for my cuts and bruises. Occasionally, I would have to pass the police, and sometimes the Guardia Civil, who were just like the police, but on steroids. This of course made me nervous, but all I could do was keep on walking, find a taxi and go. At one point, a police car drove slowly past me, and the officer in the passenger seat gave me a long, hard stare. Of course, by this time, it was possible that Sarah was back at the apartment with the police and found that I had gone, and maybe they had the description out on me. To get out of view, I approached a market stand with a few people gathered around. I then had the idea of changing my appearance and bought a baseball cap and a t-shirt. My new top had the words Costa del Sol printed across the front, and I thought this was very apt. I put it on and dumped the top I took off into a bin, noticing the small shards of broken vase as I did so. I called out to an approaching taxi, but the driver ignored me. As he passed, I saw it was the driver from the night before. He really didn't take a shine to me, that guy. Cap on, I was ready to move again. Back at the flat, Sarah, already stressed, led two policemen into her apartment. Her stress levels rose more so as she followed the armed policeman into the front room. Nobody else was there. Sarah had explained the situation to the policemen in their own language without a problem, but at this point they questioned her ability to speak the lingo, as what she had said was clearly not the case. There wasn't anybody there, not a murderer tied up on the floor or another man watching over him, but there was a bloody knife sat next to piles of cash on the coffee table, and there was also cocaine on the main table. Things were far different from what Sarah had told the police they would find in the apartment, and she had some serious explaining to do, although first she was handcuffed, sat down and had a gun drawn on her by one of the officers whilst the other searched the apartment. Robbo stood beside his red Ferrari at a petrol garage, the petrol hose filling the tank as he talked on his mobile phone. A young member of staff, Juan, was sent out by the manager of the garage to tell Robbo that the use of a mobile phone was strictly prohibited and that he had to end the call straight away. Robbo said he didn't understand Spanish, and said he didn't take too kindly to being nagged at by a mere kiosk worker. The employee was then ignored until the petrol tank was full, the fuel cover locked and Robbo had finished his phone call. Juan had remained calm and professional throughout, asking him politely, in Spanish and broken English, to hang up the phone, but was clearly stressed as his manager looked on and he hadn't been able to get the arrogant Englishman to comply in a timely manner. Robbo stared the young Spaniard in the eye. He then took out his wallet, opened it up, and showed him a large wad of cash before he walked past him towards the kiosk window to pay. It was probably twice the amount that Juan earned in a month. He was a cruel bastard, Robbo. He joined the queue, checked his watch and grew impatient at having to wait for those few precious seconds. But then gladly, things got worse for Robbo. Calmer, some might say. The engine of the red Ferrari started up with a roar and pulled away and out of the garage forecourt. Robbo came running but slipped in his expensive shoes, landing heavily on his knee in a puddle of grease. His phone fell into pieces as it made contact with the ground. He looked up, desperately searching for someone to help him. The only one person near was Juan. "That's my car," called out Robbo. "That's my fucking car. Call the police." "No comprendo, señor," replied Juan, a little smile on his face. There were now 4 police officers with Sarah at her apartment, and after a load of photos had been taken, the money, the knife and the powder had been bagged up. Jason hadn't cleaned his room out before he'd left, He'd just grabbed a few things. The police didn't know exactly what the story was at this point, and they didn't think to look to see if he had taken his passport. They had no doubt that a man was also living in the apartment with Sarah, but in reality, so far, all they had was an hysterical woman, drugs, money, and a weapon that she had previously stated was used to murder her boyfriend. Sarah knew how bad this must have looked, and when one of the officers took a call that confirmed a dead body with knife wounds and a shitty-smelling gun had been found at the address she had given them, the gravity of the situation sank in. Sarah broke down in tears again. Between the crying and the heat of the morning, she must have been close to dehydration. "I told you, I haven't done anything wrong. Please let me go," she pleaded, as two of the officers led her out of the apartment. "There were 2 men here. They killed my boyfriend. Please let me go." I was in a toilet cubicle in the airport, aware of the irony that my great escape from a life of drugs was partly taking place in a preferred location for taking drugs. I transferred the money from the sports bag into my suitcase, the checking-in document that I'd printed into my trouser pocket, and then checked all of my other pockets, making sure I had everything I needed and nothing that I didn't. I found a bag of coke, deep down into the corner of one pocket, and I thought about how many people I knew who'd think that finding a gram would be a stroke of luck. And I guess I did as well, but for different reasons, as being caught going through security with that in my pocket would have potentially caused me all manner of problems. I studied the little bag in my hand, tore it open and inspected the Charlie. This used to be a god to me, the joy in my day, and my energy at night. It was what my days were built around. I moved my suitcase off of the toilet, opened the lid and tipped out the cocaine. The powder fell to the water. It was like watching snowflakes disappear into a lake. I was ready to go. The last hurdle in my escape was getting checked in and going through security. This shouldn't be a problem, I was telling myself. Sarah didn't know my last name, bizarrely, after all these months, and I didn't think Jason would be in a position to point the finger. Plus neither of them knew I had booked a flight, so I figured I had time on my side. Of course, the closer I came to check in and then security, the more the nerves began to play up. But then I was through. I was on the home straight, and I didn't have long before I was due to board the flight, so I bought a newspaper and a bottle of water and headed to the boarding gate. Sarah was at the Marbella police station, no longer in her own clothes, but wearing a tatty gown that had been issued to her by a female officer, who then, to follow procedures, gave Sarah a cavity search. She felt utterly humiliated as she was led off to have her fingerprints and mugshots taken. I switched on my MP3 player, put in the headphones, and took my time looking over the menu as I sat in my window seat. Nothing really appealed. It was a budget airline, but I opted for a bacon roll anyway. On a full stomach, I could maybe sleep for an hour or so. The relief that washed over me as we first took off and I saw the sea below me hadn't subsided. I was happy. I was free. I'd learnt some valuable lessons in Spain, lessons that would stay with me forever. Yes, I'd hit rock bottom in some respects, but I was 2 days clean and going back to rehab first thing when touched down in England. I couldn't wait to see my family and tell my mum how sorry I was for the past and that I was finally ready to be someone who brought happiness into her life, not misery and stress. I felt bad for leaving Sarah to deal with the police on her own, but she lied to me, to everyone about everything, as far as I could now tell. I had figured out that Sarah saw getting pregnant would keep her mean for life, even get the marriage proposal from him that she so clearly desired. But her plan, to get pregnant by any means necessary, such as shagging a junkie like me and a psycho like Jason, backfired, because I mean fired blanks. After all the charm and class I thought she displayed, she was just a desperate woman looking for love in the wrong places, scheming deviously without giving a damn about the consequence, and which in this case caused the death of the man she loved. And that leaves Jason looking at a lengthy jail term, although to be honest, locking him up is probably the best thing for everyone, except him. As I drifted off to sleep, I remember feeling happy and confident about the future. For the first time, in a long time, all my troubles are behind me, I thought to myself. At the back of the plane, a small child dropped his toy car to the floor, and with his seatbelt on, he wasn't able to pick it back up. The helpful young man beside him, sat on the aisle seat and wearing sunglasses, scooped it up and handed it back to him. "Say thank you, Charlie," said the boy's mother. "Thank you, mister," said the boy, looking up at the broad grin on the kind stranger. "No worries, mate," said the Australian. "And what a good name you got there. I do like that name, Charlie."
Don't forget to subscribe and like the video. Thank you.